A new Office spinoff is finally happening, but did you know about the one that almost got the green light more than a decade ago? Let's take you back to the farm. You see, all the way back in 2013, after 9 seasons of awkward meetings, inappropriate jokes, staplers and jello, and paper sales, fans said goodbye to the folks at Dunder Mifflin, including, of course, Dwight Schrute. But what many people either forget or never even realized in the first place is that NBC once tried to extend the Office universe with a spin-off centered entirely on Rainn Wilson's iconic character. It was called The Farm. It was written, cast, and even filmed. One episode of The Office secretly doubled as its pilot, and then it just disappeared. Today, we're unpacking The Office's biggest side project. What The Farm was, why NBC canceled it, and why, in hindsight, that decision may have preserved the legacy of The Office and Dwight Schrute himself. Let's start with what exactly The Farm was. The concept was pretty simple. Dwight Schrute inherits his family's beet farm after the death of his Aunt Shirley and moves back to take over the business while managing the eccentric members of his extended family. Instead of Dunder Mifflin, the show would be set almost entirely on Schrute farms, the same farm we'd glimpsed throughout The Office in various episodes and talking heads. Dwight would become the de facto patriarch of a dysfunctional clan surrounded by a new ensemble of oddballs that included his sister Fanny, played by Roswell's Mahendra Delfino, his hippie brother Jeb, played by Thomas Middleditch of Silicon Valley, and his man-child cousin Zeke, played by Parks and Rec guest star Blake Garrett Rosenthal. They were supposed to be the Farm's version of Jim, Pam, Ryan, Kelly, and so on, right? Those guys. It's a whole new group of misfits who'd live under the same roof and work the land. But in true Schrute fashion, things would obviously get weird, and they got weird fast. The show was meant to blend workplace comedy with a quasi-family sitcom format, and there was potential, on paper, for something totally unique. Rainn Wilson, who was executive producing alongside Office showrunner Paul Lieberstein, described it at the time as a strange hybrid of a family show and a workplace comedy, where the workplace just happened to be a 60-acre beet farm in rural Pennsylvania. NBC greenlit the project in early 2012 and slotted the pilot to be filmed later that year. The team behind The Office saw this as a logical extension of the franchise. The main show was wrapping up, Steve Carell had left in season 7, and Wilson was still a standout, and Dwight remained one of the most popular characters on the series. So from a network perspective, building a spinoff around him felt like a pretty safe bet. That's how we got to The Farm. Episode 17 of season 9, and it served double duty as a standalone episode and a backdoor pilot. We all know seasons 8 and 9 of The Office left a little to be desired, and this particular episode was just strange. Now, if you rewatch the episode today, it feels very different from the rest of the series, and that's because it was different. The pacing slows down, Jim, Pam, and most of the core ensemble barely appear. Instead, we're introduced to the new supporting cast, the farm setting, and a completely different tone. You can see the seams where The Office ends and The Farm begins. The laughs are more surreal and subdued. There's a funeral sequence with an oddly sentimental vibe. There's a subplot about Dwight trying to reconnect with his niece. And there's a cold open about paintball that feels like a demo reel for a totally different program. That episode, The Farm, was produced and shot as a standalone pilot, but NBC decided not to move forward with the series before it ever aired. So rather than scrap it entirely, the producers re-edited it to fit within The Office's final season as a sort of oddity, a glimpse at the show that almost was. So why did NBC pass? There's a few reasons for that. First and foremost, the pilot didn't test very well. According to reports at the time, early screenings of The Farm received poor audience feedback. Focus groups struggled to connect with the new characters. Test audiences felt that it lacked the heart and the ensemble dynamic that made The Office work so well. Wilson was charismatic as always, but without Jim, Pam, or the rest of the familiar cast to bounce off of, the charm just started to fade. Then there was the matter of network fatigue. NBC was already looking to pivot out of the Office-style single-camera comedy phase. The Office had been a juggernaut, but by season 9, its ratings had declined, and attempts to replicate its success with other shows like Outsourced, Free Agents, and even Parks and Rec to a degree at first weren't delivering huge numbers. NBC wanted the next big hit, not a niche show about beet farming. Executives reportedly felt The Farm was too quirky, too rural, and not commercial enough to anchor a primetime slot. Behind the scenes, scheduling and creative differences really didn't help either. Paul Lieberstein was juggling his duties as both showrunner and cast member on The Office, and he was planning to leave the Mothership series to focus full-time on The Farm. Wilson had other commitments as well, and because the pilot was filmed while The Office was still in production, the writing staff was stretched pretty thin. The spinoff never got the development runway it actually needed. And then there's the whole Angela factor. In the final season of The Office, Dwight and Angela finally reconnect after years of tension, miscommunication, and secret rendezvous. Their arc culminates in the series finale with a romantic, heartfelt wedding that feels like the perfect end to their long and often ridiculous story. But The Farm would have potentially upended all of that. According to Lieberstein and Wilson, Angela wasn't planned to be a main character in the spinoff. She might have made guest appearances, but the central focus would be Dwight's direct family, not his love life. In fact, The Farm was never designed to take place after the finale. It was meant to run alongside the final season, set earlier in the timeline, which created all sorts of continuity headaches. Had the show gone forward, it would have created confusion for fans and disrupted the emotional payoff of Dwight's growth. It's hard to root for him as a mature adult stepping into a committed relationship if we're also watching him regress into petty farm feuds and sibling bickering in another series. In that sense, the cancellation of The Farm might have saved Dwight's ending. Instead of fracturing the universe, The Office stayed self-contained. Dwight got the farm, and Dwight got the girl. He became regional manager and married Angela in a deeply weird but also deeply fitting Schrute wedding ceremony, with Michael Scott returning to be his best man. Fans got closure, and The Farm faded into the background as a fascinating what-if. So how do the fans feel about it now? Well, over the years, The Farm has taken on something of a cult curiosity. Some fans consider it an underappreciated gem, a bold experiment that could have worked with a little more polish, but others see it as a tone-deaf misfire that fundamentally misunderstood what made The Office tick. The new characters never got enough screen time to make an impression. The writing leaned too heavily into quirk without the emotional grounding of the original show, and as a backdoor pilot, it just felt awkward and weird. Still, you can't blame NBC for trying. At the time, The Office was nearing its end, and Dwight was arguably the show's breakout character. Spinoffs were, and still are, network's best bet at extending a franchise's lifespan. So if anything, The Farm walks so that shows like Young Sheldon, Better Call Saul, or even maybe The Mandalorian could run. Studios were still learning how to build television universes, and The Office was testing the waters. Now today, the legacy of The Farm lives on in a single episode of The Office. It's an odd little blip in Season 9, one that longtime fans recognize as something totally different. It's not essential viewing, and it's not even particularly very funny, but it's a fascinating footnote in the history of the series, a relic of a moment when NBC almost pulled a Schrute-led sitcom out of the beat fields and onto the airwaves. In interviews since, Wilson has expressed mixed feelings. He says he was excited by the opportunity to explore Dwight more deeply and saw The Farm as a fresh, creatively challenging project, but he also admitted it probably wouldn't have worked in the long run, at least not in the way that fans would have hoped. And maybe that's the lesson here. Not every great character needs their own show. Sometimes a story is just stronger because it ends. Dwight Schrute worked because he was surrounded by the right ensemble, because his chaos was offset by Jim's smirks or Pam's empathy and Michael's manic energy. Put him in a beat farm with strangers, and it's just not the same. But there is, in fact, going to be an Office spinoff. Fast forward to today, and the world of The Office introduces The Paper. Co-created by Greg Daniels, who helmed the U.S. adaptation of The Office, and Michael Coleman from Nathan For You, The Paper carries over the original show's signature documentary style, this time shifting focus to a struggling local newspaper in Toledo, Ohio. It's going to premiere exclusively on Peacock on September 4th, 2025, and it launches with a bold 4-episode drop followed by 2 new episodes each Thursday, culminating in a 2-episode finale on September 25th. The story revolves around the historic Toledo Truth Teller, where an eager publisher enlists volunteer reporters to salvage the decaying publication. It's going to feature an entirely new ensemble, but you will recognize one face. It's Oscar Nunez, and he's back as Oscar Martinez from The Office. Production began in July of 2024, with Daniels, Coleman, and even Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant involved behind the scenes. So that means the series promises authentic mockumentary vibes paired with fresh newsroom dynamics and that Office feel that we all have come to know and love. So the next time you rewatch Season 9 and hit The Farm, remember, that episode was a fork in the road, a glimpse at an alternate timeline where The Office branched off in a radically different direction. And while we'll never know exactly what could have been, we can be thankful for what was. A perfect, absurd, emotional, and deeply weird farewell to Dunder Mifflin's finest. And as for the farm, maybe it just was never meant to sprout.